Shalom everyone, and welcome back to another installment of the Haftarot for Land of Scripture, formerly known as Hebrew and Israel. Unfortunately, for some reason, the original recording for Haftarah Shelach from Joshua chapter 2 was somehow lost, and therefore this is a brand new recording for this Haftarah. The Haftarah is in Joshua 2, and we have the story of the two spies who eventually go into Jericho, and in truth, the real connection to to the Torah portion has to do with spies, because this is the nature of haftarot. You look for a theme. They don't necessarily have to be strongly connected to the story. It's of the parasha or the theme of the concepts of the parasha only if there's a strong theme. However, this is a very, very good one and a very, very strong theme because it's basically a continuation of exactly what Moses did. Moses sent spies to see the land. Joshua was one of them. Joshua, being a continuation of Moshe, does the exact same thing. And it's quite interesting because if Joshua already knows the layout of the land and knows what's going on, why does he need to send spies? The answer being because Joshua is always supposed to be some kind of a reflection of Moses. And this is actually part of the whole idea. He is always supposed to do something like Moshe, a miniature version of something that Moshe did. So Moshe took Israel out of Egypt. Joshua brings Israel into the land. Moshe tears the sea in two. Yoshua tears the river, but with only one pillar. If with Moshe it's two pillars or two walls on both sides, with Yoshua it's one pillar, and everyone can see that pillar somehow. Moshe sends spies, Yoshua sends spies. Moshe does wars, Yoshua does wars. So we basically have a very similar, almost, I wouldn't say symmetrical, but half symmetrical structure that allows Yoshua to be very similar to Moshe, but then again, not exactly. And in truth, also, it's been 40 years since Joshua and the other spies, or Yoshua and other spies, went into the land, and therefore new reconnaissance has to be done. Now, this is actually quite critical because what's very interesting about the entirety of this concept is that they're not sitting there waiting for a miracle to happen. I made a comment the other day about the story of Abraham, in Genesis 15, where a family member, Lot and his family, are abducted by other kings during a war, and it doesn't seem to be that Abraham actually goes around to God and says, do something about it, or even prays. He hears the event, he gets up, he goes out, he wages a massive war, according to the description, against a much bigger army. He wins and comes back. Now, it doesn't mean he doesn't believe in God. Obviously, Abraham is the epitome of emunah, of true faith, but he doesn't go and wait for God to do something. He knows that God is with him and he acts. This is a very interesting concept because Yoshua also does miracles. Moshe also has miracles. Moshe, being a person very strongly connected to God, still has to do things within the physical world and not just sit around and wait for God to do something. This is a very important lesson in the concept of how the world works, because I have come across throughout my life people who wait for things to happen instead of actually doing them. So just a few insight points here. Now, the text itself starts off with, we already have the background of what's going on in chapter 1. Chapter 1 is also very deterministic in the way it approaches things, where there's a speech and there's warnings and an angel shows up and so on. And now we actually get into the narrative. They're still sitting on the other side of the river. They're still waiting to see how they get in. And before they do anything, the gateway into the land is one of the most eastern cities, which is Jericho. Now, it's not the only eastern city. It has to be pointed out that people were living in the Jordan Valley, and especially in and around the Dead Sea for a very, very long time. However, Jericho is the major city of the area by this point, and it also sits next to a fountain, next to a well. Actually, no, it's more than a well. It's basically a spring, and that's how the city can survive in such an area. Because by this point, the entire area is mostly desert, but you can grow things there. There is enough to grow. If you go to the Jordan Valley even today, you'll see plants growing all over the place and so on. So it's a very interesting microclimate that we have there. And I will point out that we do have some issues when we, for example, we go and look at the barley in the region. There is always the question of Jericho, because Jericho has its own microclimate that affects the way the barley behaves. And eventually, when they cross the river, it's full of water because it's the time of Ksir Chitim. It's Ksir Chitim probably, but it's time of harvest, and there's a lot of water in the area due to the river and so on. But to enter the land, you actually have to conquer Jericho. There's no other way. So what does he do? We start reading. Vaishlach Yoshua bin Nun min nashitim shnaim anashim meragelim. So Joshua sends out from the place called Shittim 2 men who are spies. Shnei anashim meragelim. So they just meragelim. They specify shnei anashim. It's kind of interesting, the wording, because you can say this as shnei meragelim, shnei anashim meragelim. The word anashim seems to be a little bit redundant. But that's how it's structured. And they're designated as meragelim, and with ragal, to walk around and spy. Cheresh, these are silent. So this is a very long nominal construction. They are 2 men, they are spies, and they go around quietly. I would expect this to be just, the same by saying spies, they're going around quietly. But the thing to think about here is that they're not going in announced in any form, shape, or way. This is reconnaissance to the extreme. They're not trusting miracles. They're not expecting them to be somehow hidden. They are functioning as any spy would within the natural world. So they have to pretend to be someone else. And that's crucial, again, because we're not reading this as a miracle story. We're reading this as a natural story with natural occurrences. And this is extremely contrastive to to what happens later on when they cross the river. Lemor saying to them, Lechu re'u et haaretz, go see the land, ve'et Yericho, and Jericho. So they're not going to go all over the land, they're seeing the territory. The fact that it says ve'et Yericho probably is used to shrink the territory they're going to go into. So the text skips ahead, doesn't care about how they cross, it doesn't care their journey, because the main point is what happens later. So there's this concept of speeding up the material where you just skip ahead and just go to the main point. And they went, so they entered into the house of a prostitute. The Midrashim try to argue she's not a prostitute, this is some innkeeper and so on. Zonah would be mezina, someone who feeds people. In truth, it would not be surprising as a prostitute she also ran an inn. I don't think there's an actual contradiction here between these two sides. It's just the Midrashim are trying to kind of elevate her status, to say, oh, she's not a prostitute, even though nowhere in the Tanakh does the word zonah mean anything besides prostitute. But it's out of respect to her because she becomes an important character in our history, so they're trying to say, oh, it's not that. It's a very common thing that's done. So they go cheresh, but somehow they're discovered. Vayamar lemelech Yericho le'emor, and it was said to the king of Jericho, saying, Hine anashim bao hena alayla, behold, men have entered here tonight, Bnei Israel lachpor et haaretz, from the children of Israel, because they can see, they know there's a camp. Everyone knows there's a camp of the Israelites on the other side. And someone saw them crossing, maybe someone heard them speak and realized they're not speaking in their dialect, because chances are the people of Jericho and the people in the Israelites spoke the same language, but they sound different, they're different dialects, they're not speaking in the same language. Someone figured out they're there, and they've come to spy the land. And again, this is quite interesting. How do they know these details? Maybe they just ran off and decided to enter the land privately. it is possible that the spies just didn't operate properly, didn't do things correctly. No one knows. It's kind of a funny situation where we're skipping information. We're just going ahead and saying these are the facts. So, and somehow they know they went into her house. I mean, they're supposed to be cheresh, but they're not. They don't seem to be doing very good as cheresh, as silent, as secretive. So he knows they're there. Vayishlach melech Yericho el Rachav le'emor. The king of Jericho sent to Rachav, saying to her, Hotzi ha'anashim habayim elaich, bring out the men who came to you. Notice, by the way, he doesn't just barge into her house. It's quite interesting. He doesn't barge into her house, he doesn't say the name of the king or anything. He says, bring them out. There's a possibility here that Rachav is a much more important person than we actually realize. It's possible she's actually quite wealthy, and the king may be a little bit concerned of having a fight with her because she has money. And kings always suck up to the person who has money. This is a historical fact. Even today, people who run states and so on, they're always looking for the people with money. This might be what's going on here. So they said, bring out the men who came to you, asher ba'u levetech, which have come to your house. Ki lachpor et haaretz ba'u, for they have come to spy the land. Verse 4, Vatikach ha'isha et shnei ha'anashim v'tatzpino. So she took the two men and she hid him. The o at the end, tatzpino, from root tzafan, to hide, is in the singular. So some people try to argue, almost like a Harry Potter type of thing. One of them kind of was able to hide. He had a cloak or something. No. The thing is that, first of all, it's possible that there's a spelling mistake here, a scribal mistake, where it should be with tatzpinim. This kind of stuff happens when copyists do a bad job and so on. But more to the point, it's also possible that by doing an action with one person, you can describe it as in a singular, but actually there's a plural. It's basically a collective type of verb. That's another possibility of what happened here. So she hides them, and this is probably flashback. She knew they were coming, so she hid them. So this is not as if she ran upstairs, she hid them, and then she ran back downstairs. No, she knew something was going on. Maybe because of a network she had in the city, they knew what was going on. She got information before the king's messengers came in, and she hid them in advance. And then when they came in, she could already make the argument, they're not here. Vatomer ken, yes. By the way, it's a very, very funny thing that a couple of days ago I saw a video where someone says the word ken to say yes doesn't appear anywhere in the Hebrew Bible, but here's one. It's a common word. Ba'u elai ha'anashim, the men came to me, v'lo yadati me'ayin hem, I didn't know where they were from. She says, I don't know who they were. People come and go here all the time. This is probably why the sages say, the Midrash says that she was an innkeeper, that it's possible that a lot of people stayed there. She had like a big house where basically a type of inn, and people came and went all the time. And this is how she's able to make this argument. So verse 5, Vayhi ashar lisgon, it was when the gate was closing. So this is usually towards evening. This is a security measure. Bachoshech, during darkness. V'anashim yatz'u lo yadati ana halchu anashim. They went out, the men went out. I do not know. They just, it was going dark. They said, we're leaving. They apparently walked out of the city. That was their plan. And, I don't know where they are. I have no idea where they went. Ritfu maher acharem ki tasigum, but go, haste. This is like this is almost comic, like, oh, go quickly, they're there somewhere. Oh, they're there. It's you can read this a little bit in a comic way. And she says, Ritfu maher, go chase them fast, you can get them. So now we flip the scene. You have to imagine, like, they run off, and then verse 6, Vihi alatam hagaga, she took them up to the roof. So notice how the discourse with the men in verse, basically the second half of verse 4 and verse 5, is almost like in parenthesis to the actual narrative, because then we go back and it gives us a bit of a description where she hid them. Vehi alatam hagaga. This is almost like a note into the text. She took them up to the roof. V'tatminem b'fishtei ha'itzim, and she hid them. Now it's in the plural, unlike previously where it's a single. She hid them in the reeds of wood. They had some kind of she had some kind of wood on the roof, maybe flax that she was using for something. They were set up. They were organized in rows on her roof. People used the roof for a lot of different things. One of them was to also dry things on the roof and so on. And then we flick back to the pursuers. So the men, the king's men, chased them through the road to the Jordan. Derech HaYarden is a road that led to the river. Al HaMa'abarot, on the passages. This is the sections where they could cross from one side of the river to the other. V'ashar sagaru acharei, and they closed the gate behind them. Kind of like as if they know that there's a chance that they're still in the city and they're being lied to, so they're still closing the gate. When they left the city, when the pursuers left them, they closed the gate behind them. Vehema, and they, okay, now we're flipping back, we're going back and forth here. So this is obviously going back to the spies. Vehema terem yishkavun, they have yet to lay down, to go to sleep. V'alata alehem al hagag, and she went up to them to the roof. It's very interesting how the exposition here is. There's a lot of movement here. They're running here, they're going up and down the stairs and so on. There's this sense of pressure. The idea here is to give you probably a sense of pressure. There's a lot of pressure here. They seem to be trusting in God, so they probably didn't do a very good job in hiding who they were. And they're kind of almost nonchalant. They're on the roof. Oh, we're on the roof. We're resting here. Everything's okay. They say in German, alles gut. Everything's okay. We're just going to lay down here. And everyone around them is running around. And this may have actually led to the idea that God hid them. The whole idea that one of them was actually hidden, because there seems to be something a little bit unnatural about how calm they are. So they're doing their job, but they're trusting in God. It's almost like a synthesis of the two ideas I mentioned earlier, where you have to do things, but you're trusting in God, which is quite interesting. Verse 9, Vatomer el ha'anashim, and she said to the men, Yadati ki natan Adonai lachem et haaretz. Now it's revealed. I know, somehow she knows, I know, for the Lord has given you the land. This is why they're so calm, and she's willing to lie in such a way. This may also explain why the king's men also didn't burst into the house. There's some protection there as well. So you go ahead, do your job. Remember, God is with you. You still have to do your job. And she says here, somehow they know the rumors, they know the information, they know something is coming. She's almost speaking in a level of prophecy. This is why she's so respected. I know God has given you the land. And that your terror, the fear of you has fallen upon us. And for the people of the land are withering away out of fear from before you. This is almost actually no. This is using this very similar words, and Namogu is exactly from the Song on the Sea. Namogu kol yoshvei Kenan. All the people of Canaan are withering away in fear. Mug is to be a coward. It's cowardice. So she says here, they're all cowering before you. This is giving us a hint to the Song on the Sea in Exodus 15. Ki shamanu, and now we're told explicitly, for we heard, Asher hovish Adonai tmei suf penechem betzetchem mitzrayim. For we heard that the Lord dried the waters of the Sea of Suf before you when you left Egypt. This is 40 years later, and people still remember. Asher asitem mishne malchei Amori asher be'ever ha'Yarden, and that which you did to the two kings of the Amorites, Og and Sihon, on the other side of the Jordan. The Sihon u'le'og asher charamtem otam, to Sihon and Og, which you did cherem. Cherem is a action where you basically declare holy war, and anything and everything related to the people you declared holy war to is dedicated to God. So when they do a war like this, nothing is to be left. Nothing is to survive. Nothing is to be touched either. Everything has to be dedicated to God and destroyed. So there are studies about the concept of the cherem. The cherem is basically what you would call holy war, and it's not declared easily. It's only done in very, very specific situations. But the reason she brings this up is because they know they're marching with God before them, and therefore she knows no one can really defeat them. So they heard this, and verse 11 says, Vanishma vayimas levavenu, we heard, and our hearts melted. This is supposed to be in contrast to the spies. The spies caused the people, Israel's heart to melt. Here, it's the other way around. It's a contrast. It's a fixing almost of the story. It's a reversal of what originally happened. And people don't have a spirit, the courage, the desire to do things. The spirit has not raised up amongst any man. Using the singular is to indicate that this is no one. So there is this concept in languages and overall that we use these idiomatic expressions. Obviously, anyone listening to this knows exactly what I'm talking about. But the idea here of ish is kind of collective and singular at the same time. It's like saying no man dare. There's no one here, single or plural. It doesn't matter. So it's quite interesting how these things are created, because I think the most fascinating thing is that a lot of concepts of humanity were are found everywhere. You find people doing very similar things in different places. Everyone has drums. Everyone has music. I don't think I've ever come across a culture that doesn't have any form of music. There might be, but I've never come across such a culture. The desire to make shelter, language. Not everyone invents a writing system. That's a really interesting thing. Tell the truth, if I remember correctly, Aristotle actually mocked the concept of writing. He said it's a fad and it won't achieve anything, which is the exact opposite. This is why when people say writings are Aristotle, he probably didn't write them. There may have been his students who wrote them or something. But it's quite interesting how you find similar expressions from place to place. For example, I've been posting about on Facebook. I've been posting about expressions in Hebrew, and there's almost always something similar to it in other languages. The expression might be slightly different, but it's still in the same vein. So it's very interesting how these expressions go back and forth or appear in different languages. But there is a claim that some expressions in English were influenced by the fact that the Hebrew Bible was translated into English. That what happened was they saw something in Hebrew that transferred to English, and because this was one of the core writings of English in the 1600s, it influenced the way English moved and became a language. So that might be part of it as well. And then she makes this very strong, I don't know if to say monotheistic, because we have to be careful a little bit with this term. The issue with how we define monotheism in the Hebrew Bible is a bit more complicated than the monotheism we find today in Judaism. So I would say quasi-monotheistic, or at least a confession of belief in a specific God. And she says, Ki Adonai Elohechem, for the Lord your God, Hu Elohim b'shamayim mimal v'al haaretz mitachat, for he is a God in the heavens above and the earth below. This is very similar to what Melchizedek says to Abraham, Koneh shamayim va'aretz, creator of heaven and earth. This is a term used to express high power, to say this is the God. This is, even if you say she believes in other gods, this is to say this is the God. This is not a God that has any limits. He is ruler in the heavens and he's ruler on the earth. And therefore, there's a point to what she's saying. And usually in biblical Hebrew, when you reach the word ve'ata, and now, this is the point of what she's trying to say. Swear to me by the Lord. Swear to me by his name. This is binding. Ki asiti imachem chassid, for I've done with you favor. Chassid here is covenant. She's saying we're cutting a covenant here. The choice of words is not accidental. Va'asitem gamaten im bet avi Hess, and you will do with the house of my father such a favor, covenant. V'natatem li ot emet, and you would give me a sign of truth. You are going to, like any covenant, you are going to do something here that indicates that you are doing a trustworthy sign with me, that I can trust that you are striking a covenant with me. And it's possible that the sign here is to actually do the next thing. And you were allowed to live, my father and my mother, and my brothers and my sisters. This is probably also extended family, not just brothers and sisters. Probably includes cousins. And everything that they own. And you will save our souls or ourselves from death. So they say this is reasonable. And the men said to her, they take the extreme. This is life for life. You saved our lives, we will save your lives. Our souls under you to die. Okay? If you keep it, we'll keep it. If we die, you die. But also, if you die, we have to take the toll as well. We probably have to die as well. Not sure if this is exactly what they're saying. If you don't tell anyone our deeds here, and we, when the Lord gives us the land, we will do to you a favor and truth, which is basically a truthful favor. We're going to do here a truthful, trustworthy covenant. So it's short, but they're basically saying what she expects them. So verse 15, she allows them to go down with a rope from the window. So she seems to have a house that sits on the wall. So when we talk about the structure of Jericho, so Jericho basically had the walls that were discovered. There's a whole story here about the excavations of Jericho and recently arguments about Jericho and what they did in Jericho and if they knew what they were digging and so on. The original excavations and then Kathleen Canyon who tried to flip everything. And then researchers who came in the 90s have basically said Kathleen Canyon made mistakes. Now there's another group that's trying to claim that Kathleen Canyon did not make mistakes. The other group is suspected now for doing political agendas in the dig. Anyhow, massive mess. But the reality is that the walls that were discovered in Jericho, that two teams originally, the original team and the team of the 90s, argued that these were the walls of the Jericho of the time. These are walls that were toppled over, were basically what's called box walls. Box walls basically mean that you have a wall that's built from two sections. You have the outer wall and the inner wall, and in between there's a space. And in these spaces, people usually lived. So she clearly lives within these boxes, and these are basically chambers. And this raises the question of, what was the status of people who lived in such places? But it's very possible that she owned a section, or she owned a large section, and so on. But it explicitly says, "Ki veitah bekira choma, uvachoma hi yoshavet." For her house is in the wall of the city, and in the wall she dwells. Now, on the other hand, she has a roof. But usually when you have the upper part of a wall, that's usually where garrisons walk around and they check what's going on beyond the wall. So this may be a bit of a complexity in the story, trying to explain how they escaped. So it's possible that maybe she had a house next to the wall, and she owned also a section in the wall. It's not very clear because usually the houses which were in the wall, these were basically chambers. You didn't really have a house in the wall and so on. So there's something a bit difficult with the way the setup of where her house is and so on. But I would say that the possibility is that she has a house next to the wall, and she also owns a section within the wall. That's the only way I think you can actually explain this. If you have other ideas, please share. And it says here in verse 16, "V'tomer lehem hahar alechu," she says, go to the mountains. So if you ever look at the area, you can see it's a flat area, but the valley of the Jordan River is basically surrounded by steep. So you have on the one side and the other side, it's very clear the area split at some stage, and you have basically hills, mountains on both sides, and the distance is not very big. I mean, if I calculate it correctly, it's maybe a few miles. So if you start running towards those hills, there's lots of caves to hide in. So that's probably what they were counting on. Lest the pursuers find you. Yifgeo seems to be a double meaning because paga means to meet or encounter, but also can mean to harm. So this has like a double meaning. V'nechbetem shama shloshet yamim, and you will hide there for 3 days. Ad shov harodefim v'achar telechu darkechem, until the pursuers return, and then go back to your way. So you have to let the things calm down. They're gone. When you wait 2-3 days, oh, they're gone. Okay, that's done. It's over. We can't find them now. Verse 17, ויאמרו אליה האנשים, the men said to her, ניקים אנחנו משבועתך הזה אשר השבעתנו. So now we're going back to the oath. Again, this story is built from a lot of interjections in the middle. Something like this, something like that. And then, they give her a partial oath. Then we go back into the story, and then we go back to the oath because they have to affirm this before they leave. And the men said to her, we are clean. We are not guilty of anything from this oath which you have made us take, in a case that. Verse 18, Hine anachnu va'im ba'aretz, and behold, when we enter the land, et tikvat chut hashani hazeh tiksheri b'chalon asher horatenu vo. This piece of crimson yarn, so this is a type of bright, ruddy orange color. When I looked into the research about how this looked, I actually spoke with the researcher who was head of the people who worked on this material on the crimson. This was actually the brother-in-law of the rabbi who married us, and he's a professor of Talmudic studies, Mishnah and Talmud at Bar-Ilan University, Professor Zohar Amar. And a very practical man. He always tries to experiment. He finds things from the Roman era, late Second Temple Roman era, and he tries to experiment to see how it works and so on. So back in the early 2000s, he also worked on trying to discover what the crimson looked like. And I asked him about this because in the images and the description, it came out this bright orange. And not neon orange, not something like from the 80s or something, but a pretty strong color. And I asked him about it. He says, it's just this how it comes out. I asked him, did it manipulate anything? He says, no, it's this very bright color. So the idea here is that if she put it out the window, people will think, well, why is she hanging something like this out the window? And the answer probably is that, she's drying it. She dyed it, and now she's drying it. But it still would be kind of suspect that she has that there. So, and it takes a while until they come back. So people say, well, it's already dry. Why do you have this out your window? So she may have actually had to play games. She would have to make one, wash it, put it outside, and probably for a while she may have made new ones just to disguise the fact that, why is this sitting here? So she made a new one each time they dried out to make sure there's a consistency here. A thought. I'm not saying this is what happened. So they say this yarn of crimson wool you will tie to the window, in the window which you let us come down from. And your father and your mother and your brother and all the household of your father you will gather into your house. Verse 19, it will be anyone who goes out from the doors of your house outwards. This is when the Israelites arrive. His blood is upon his own head, and we are clean. We are not guilty of anything. And anyone who is with you in the house, his blood is upon our head. If anyone kills anyone from your family who was indoors, we are guilty of murder, and it has to be dealt with. They don't say how. They say it will be our fault. If a hand will be at him, in him, which means usually when you talk about hand to be in something or outstretched towards someone, usually this means violence in biblical Hebrew. But then again, another stipulation, ve'im, and if Tagidi devarenu zeh, and if you tell anyone our words here, our thing here, which basically is a repeat um, of verse 14. If you tell anyone about what we did here, we will be clean, we'll be not guilty, we will be released from this oath which you have made us take. Verse 21, she affirms, and she said, as your words, thus it will be. Because usually the word can means thusly, it's kind of a repeat of what was said. She sent them away and they went. She tied the yarn of crimson on the window. And they went and they entered the mountain area. They sat there for 3 days. I'm assuming she probably gave them provisions as well. Ad shavu harodefim, until the pursuers returned. And also, they kind of sit in the mountains. They have to sit in an area where there's water. So they may have found a way to get close to a stream or something, or another fountain in the area. It might be a way of figuring out where they were hiding, just for those who might want to dig in the area. And they seeked out, the pursuers seeked out on all the road, which means they did a perimeter, and they didn't find them. Verse 23, the two men returned, and they came down from the mountain. They crossed eventually, and they reached Joshua, son of Nun. We don't know how long has passed, probably 4 to 5 days, because they still have to travel in secret and so on. They told him everything that found them, everything that happened. Verse 24, and this is how this ends. It ends with this triumphant statement. And they said to Joshua, Ki natan Adonai be'adenu et kol haaretz, for the Lord has given the whole land to us. V'gam namogu kol yishvei haaretz mipanenu. Repeating again what she said earlier, the quote from the Song on the Sea, the almost like closing the loop because they're about to cross the water. For all the dwellers of the land are cowardice before, and they're cowering before us. Everyone's afraid of our arrival. This is in the bag. Everything is going to happen. Everything God has promised. Everything we saw with Moses is going to happen with you as well. This is a prelude to everything that happens onwards. But the idea here is to close the circle also with chapter 1. So when I taught chapter 1 back in the day, one of the main discussions that I did was about, again, Joshua and Moses. Everything that Joshua does, Moses does. I just realized I'm inconsistent with the names. I'm using English and Hebrew at the same time. Please forgive me for that. Or I'm skipping around between the names. I'm going to stick to English. Joshua and Moses are supposed to be reflections of one another. Joshua is supposed to basically be the moon, as the Midrash describes it. He is the moon, Moses is the sun, and he always reflects what Moses does, but smaller. But then on the other hand, when it comes to war, he's greater. He does more war, he does more battles, because Joshua might be a prophet and a leader, but he's still the warlord. He is the first general. And his descriptions of what he does, as James Hoffmeyer puts it, he has a book about Israel in Egypt. It's a very, very interesting book. I recommend reading it, where he basically says the book of Joshua, all the way to chapter 13, is basically the equivalent of a royal inscription of conquest as other kings would do. So he asks this really interesting question where he says, why don't we find monumental literature, monumental inscriptions in the Israelite world? And his response is, because they have the Bible. That's the monumental inscriptions. That's the whole holy history. That is the history of God and Israel and the deeds of the people. The Israelites didn't write gigantic monuments because the attitude was, this is a continuation of the written covenant with God. Everything in Joshua, Judges, everything happens after that is a continuation of the holy history and the holy covenant being recorded the same way Moses did it. The only things which are written is you have the tablets, you have Joshua writing the Torah on stones on Mount Eval, but the main point is the book. The idea that you can have information that moves around. You don't have to travel to some site with a huge monument glorifying an individual as kings used to do. Oh, put this next to my palace. Anyone who wants to see it has to come and see me. No, this is something you can go anywhere and travel everywhere. It's as if God is traveling throughout the land all the time. The presence of Torah throughout the land is God's part of God's presence in the land. So this is why they wrote these things down in scroll form instead of stone. I hope you enjoyed this relatively short discussion, and I hope you have some insight from this. I hope I've taught you something new. If not, still thank you for joining me, and kol tuv.